Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the 15th of October 2012, the podcast that gets cranky when it hasn't had its nap. This is your host, Shane Killian. First, a brief correction. In the previous podcast, I said the drugs Ativan and Haldol were antipsychotics, based on the news sources reporting on the story, and not to be given to epileptic patients undergoing a seizure. While Haldol is an antipsychotic, Ativan isn't. It's a sedative and an anticonvulsant. However, while it can be used in the long-term treatment of some forms of epilepsy, it is not recommended as a first-line treatment and not considered a good idea for any form of epilepsy if other options are available. An announcement before we continue. Next week's podcast will be an election special, looking at all of the candidates and reviewing their positions. We're calling for people to send in their reasons for voting for the presidential candidate of their choice. Think Obama deserves a second term? Think Romney can do better? Or maybe you're for Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, or Virgil Goode. Send in your defense of your candidate to podcast@bogosity.tv. You can type it up or even send it to us in an audio file so we can play it right in the podcast. The more feedback we get from supporters, the better we'll be able to cover all the candidates. Now let's eviscerate the news of the bogus. In yet another blow to claims of the RIAA and other pro-copyright cartels and lobbies, a suite of studies from Columbia University has shown that US and German file sharers spend 30% more on legal music purchases than users who don't engage in file sharing over the internet. It should come as no surprise that music pirates amassed much larger collections of music than their non-pirating counterparts. But the surprising result of the study, at least surprising to people who haven't been paying attention to the data, is that a greater amount of these collections were purchased legally, mostly through online sources where music can be purchased legally and downloaded immediately. Another surprise is that ripping CDs borrowed from friends accounts for almost as much piracy as online file sharing. Of course, this kind of piracy has always been going on. When I was in high school, we made mixtapes on a cassette of our favorite music, and copied each other's mixtapes for ourselves. And many boomboxes came with dual cassette decks to make this copying easy. People have always found ways to copy music from each other, and share music with each other. Each time the industry has cried foul, saying it'll hurt sales. But in reality, spreading music around just makes it more popular, and increases sales. People buy music, concert tickets, and merchandising from bands they found via file sharing that they may not have even heard of otherwise. The industry's own studies repeatedly show that either piracy is a wash, it generates as many sales as it eliminates, or it's a net benefit. Unfortunately, the copyright lobby still has its people in legislatures and on the bench worldwide. At some point, the evidence will win over cronyism. But how long will it take, and how many lives will be directly harmed in the process? If you think the entertainment industry going after people who, by all accounts, are benefiting their industry is the height of stupidity, hold on to your hats, 'cause you ain't seen nothing yet. The state of North Carolina has shut down or investigated blogs, newsletters, and other content generated by 50 different individuals or companies because they're practicing nutrition without a license. The one who's gotten the most exposure is Charlotte resident Steve Cooksey, whose blog advocating the paleo diet was censored by the North Carolina Board of Nutrition/Dietetics. They said that he was not allowed to make many of the claims of his blog, no matter how well supported by the evidence, because he wasn't a licensed dietitian. The Institute for Justice has taken up his case and is prepared to take it all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. But the board is going after more than just bloggers. They've gone after athletic trainers, a spa, a pharmacist, a nurse, and even a licensed medical doctor. They've even gone after Duke Integrative Medicine, a research institution affiliated with the Duke University School of Medicine, one of the top medical universities in the country. According to the board, physicians can't even give diet advice to their own patients. It probably comes as no surprise to regular listeners that all of this was the result of complaints filed by registered dietitians, and the board exists to protect them in their professions. More of the sadly typical cronyism that seems to be epidemic in government at all levels. Here are some of the things that it's illegal for anyone other than licensed dietitians to say in North Carolina. You can't say that diabetics should eat less sugar. You can't say that an overweight person should consume fewer calories. You can't tell someone with high blood pressure to eat less salt. You can't tell someone with high LDL cholesterol to eat fewer carbohydrates. No matter how well known or how well established scientifically the claim is, you cannot pass on this information to anyone without being a licensed dietitian. Not even if you're a licensed physician treating your patients. And since I just said these things, and I'm in North Carolina, will they come after this podcast too? Maybe there are some people out there giving bad nutritional advice. But the actions of the board don't seem to have anything to do with whether or not the advice being given is medically sound, scientifically supported, or proven effective. It all has to do with whether or not you have a piece of paper from the government, a piece of paper designed to protect not the public, but the profits of dietitians. That's not only textbook cronyism, it's a blatant violation of our freedom of speech. Good luck to the Institute for Justice. If you're a business offering a service, like say transportation, and you want to lower ticket prices, what do? Well, you can set up a concession stand or a snack bar and use the profits from that to cover the money lost on tickets. It's a very good way of doing it because snack bars are easy to run at a tidy profit. Unless, of course, you're the government. Amtrak, the government-run passenger rail system in the United States, lost $84.5 million on its snack bars. And in case you think that's just a one-year quirk brought on by the recession, it's actually close to its average over the last 10 years when Amtrak lost a total $833 million running its snack bars at a loss. And the company's snack bars have never broken even. They'd be better off eliminating the snack bar entirely, or even just turning it over to a private catering firm who could worry about their own profits and losses. But no, the taxpayer is footing the bill for losses that would only be incurred by the most incompetent of incompetents. The figures come from a report from the Heritage Foundation, Federal Spending by the Numbers. They found all sorts of places where federal spending could be cut, including 34 areas identified by the Government Accountability Office, which included economic development programs, federal agencies, employment and training programs, and teacher quality programs, which, for some strange reason, were run through the Department of Defense. They also found that the Fed spent $1.7 billion on the maintenance of unused or underutilized buildings. A $2 million intern program that resulted in only a single full-time hire. The IRS spending $862,000 to store furniture it wasn't even using. An Inspector General audit that found the Department of Energy has lost $500 million worth of green energy equipment bought with stimulus money. On and on and on. All of these are things to keep in mind when politicians try and tell you what good stewards they are of your money and how there's just no place else to cut. Of course, cutting these items won't balance the budget. You'd have to massively cut defense, Medicare, and Social Security to do that, but it does show what little incentive government has to spend money wisely. So next time some politician says they need money for their pet boondoggle and promises the money will be well spent, remember that these are the same people who can't even profitably run a snack bar. Think back to your school days. Think about your principal, vice principal, guidance counselor, etc. Now think of how you would have felt if they had followed you around all day. Essentially, that's what's happening at a school district in Texas, which is requiring students to wear a photo ID embedded with tracking chips. Many of the students have refused to wear them and are feeling the repercussions. Some of them claim they're being harassed by teachers and other officials. Some say they've even been barred from cafeterias and libraries. At least one student, Andrea Hernandez, was told she could not participate in school elections or vote for homecoming king and queen if she refuses to wear the chip. Quote, "I had a teacher tell me I would not be allowed to vote because I did not have the proper voter ID. I had my old student ID card, which they originally told us would be good for the entire 4 years we were in school. He said I needed the new ID with a chip in order to vote." Yes, that's right. These students are wearing their existing photo ID, dated as good through all 4 years of school. Now, apparently, the schools are backing out on that and claiming that these IDs are no longer valid. Hernandez's father is supportive of her and rejected a compromise from the school which would require that they stop criticizing the program. Quote, I told him that was unacceptable because it would imply an endorsement of the district's policy, and my daughter and I should not have to give up our constitutional rights to speak out against a program that we feel is wrong. Ostensibly, the RFID program is being rolled out to solve the problem of truancy, and the district says they'll get another $2 million in state funding with better attendance figures. The problem is it's hard to see how this would be an improvement. Want to skip school? Just pay another kid to carry around your badge. And it's not like they can tell where you really are when you skip, unless you're foolish enough to carry your badge around with you. There's a larger concern here. RFID chips always broadcast their location, and there's no real security involved. This means that anyone, even a sexual predator, could track the children wherever they go. So not only might this not even improve attendance, it may be placing the students in additional danger as well. If they really want to prevent truancy, they should study the reasons why students are skipping school and attack the problem from that angle. Sometimes truancy may be an indication of a mental health issue or problems at home. Other times it can mean a problem at school, such as bullying, that make the student afraid to come to class. But more and more, particularly in schools where truancy is specifically a problem, students who skip classes cite as the biggest reason the fact that the class is boring and they don't actually learn anything there. Teachers who improve the classroom environment find that attendance increases. Imagine that! Who'd have thought? But apparently, actually improving the quality of education isn't something that Texas educators want to consider. Far better to infringe on the civil rights of their students than to actually start educating them. And now it's time to violate the principles of this week's biggest bogon emitter. There's been a lot of controversy about various recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize, to the point where many began to consider it a joke. It was given to Cordell Hull, whose actions denied the saving of over 900 Jewish refugees in World War II, condemning many of them to Nazi concentration camps. Henry Kissinger, the man behind the Cambodia bombings, the kidnappings and murders of Operation Condor, and the invasion of Cyprus, received the Peace Prize in 1973 for a ceasefire that never took place. Kissinger winning the Nobel Prize prompted satirist Tom Lehrer to say the political satire was now obsolete. Since then, it's been given to Yasser Arafat, who promised to stop killing people, but kept on doing it anyway. Then, in 2007, it became little more than a joke when it was given to former Vice President Al Gore for a bad PowerPoint presentation. And then in 2009, it was given to Barack Obama, who went on to engage in drone strikes that have killed thousands, including over 100 children. So it would come as little surprise that the prize gets handed out to the Nobel Committee's political heroes instead of people who actually deserve it. And even more laughably, the 2012 Nobel Prize was given to, get this, the European Union. This amid riots in Greece, unrest throughout the EU, Germany threatening to pull out. It was given for what the committee called 67 years of peace. Forgiving the fact that the EU has only formally existed for the last 20 of those years, they seem to have forgotten the Greek Civil War, the Hungarian Revolution, the IRA, the Cod Wars, the Romanian Revolution, and the 10-Day War. Of course, all that was before the formal establishment of the EU in 1992, but since then, you have the Georgian Wars, the Croatian War, the Bosnian War, the Chechen Wars, the Kosovo War, the dissident Irish Republican campaign, the Macedonian insurgency, and most recently the border clashes between Serbia and Kosovo. Apparently, the Nobel Committee considers this to be peace. Thanks to the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, the prize has now become beyond a joke. It's a sad and increasingly irrelevant high five that is more and more given for political reasons, while the real peacemakers of the world get increasingly ignored. I don't know what else the committee could possibly have needed to do in order to become this week's biggest bogon emitter. And now it's time to refuse to facilitate this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! And this week it goes to Robert Wright, senior editor at The Atlantic, for his laughable attempt to take down his colleague, Gary Johnson supporter Connor Friedersdorf, and defend his choice of Barack Obama in his op-ed, Why I Refuse to Vote for Obama. I guess I should give him a little bit of credit for mentioning Johnson. That already puts him ahead of most news editors, but frankly, his whole diatribe is so full of such incredible fail, it doesn't really help him much. Right off the bat, he admits Obama's hideous crimes. Quote, I can see the appeal of Connor's argument. The Obama policies he finds unacceptable, such as drone strikes that kill innocents, the assassination of American citizens abroad without due process of law, and other assaults on civil liberties, are policies I've been criticizing for a long time. And Connor's principled stand on these deal breakers, as he calls them, is inspiring. Okay, good. He's inspired by such a principled stand against outright murder. Good for him. However, I sense a but coming. Quote, "But this isn't a movie, so I have a hard time ignoring the consequences of implicitly encouraging would-be Obama supporters to nullify their votes and thereby increase the chances that Mitt Romney will be our next president." Okay, his first problem is insisting that Johnson supporters are would-be Obama supporters. Funny how Romney supporters say differently, that we would all have voted for Romney were it not for Gary Johnson. The fact that so many of us just wouldn't vote at all if there weren't a third option just doesn't seem to occur to them. Such is the mind of a dogmatist. He continues, quote, "I'm what philosophers call a consequentialist, someone who judges the rightness and wrongness of behaviors by their consequences." Okay, I got your consequences right here. Supporting either Obama or Romney will get us more wars, fewer civil liberties, rising government spending, rising deficits, more drug prohibition, on and on and on. Those are the consequences of either Obama or Romney getting in the White House. So what consequences is he concerned about? Quote, "Suppose that President Obama was what he in fact is, a drone-striking, civil liberties disregarding president. Suppose you could be pretty sure that Mitt Romney's policies on drones and civil liberties wouldn't be any better. Suppose Romney started a war that killed 1 million people, or 10 million. Or suppose he would go nuts and nuke half the world, or the whole world. Is there any point at which you concede that casting a vote that increases the chances of a Romney victory is the wrong thing to do?" Wow. Well, I guess if you can come up with your own thought experiments, you can do whatever you want. I mean, I could say, suppose that Obama busts an aneurysm and goes insane and starts eating babies. You can suppose whatever you want. But Wright is a self-described utilitarian. Doesn't that mean he's supposed to look at the actual consequences and not just make up some? There are no discernible differences in foreign policy between Obama and Romney. They both want to start a war with Iran, even though the best intelligence experts say there's no way Iran is getting a nuclear weapon. They both support the drone strikes in Syria, Yemen, Pakistan, and other places. The fact is, there's no reason to think it would be any better or worse under one than the other. Empirically, it looks like it's going to get worse at about the same rate it's been getting worse, following a growth curve. Both of them are going to expand the wars and kill even more people. A consequentialist would have to look at Obama's record, what he's done in 3.5 years versus what George W. Bush did in 8, and see that he did so much worse that you'd have to be completely deluded to even make the claim that Obama is anything resembling a good candidate on foreign policy. He then goes to the spoiler argument, quote, "In 2000, a bunch of voters on the left decided that Al Gore's likely policies included some deal breakers, so they voted for Ralph Nader. That's why George Bush became president. No, George Bush became president because Al Gore was a joke. If Al Gore had taken his home state of Tennessee, he would have won. If he had taken Clinton's home state of Arkansas, he would have won. Ralph Nader didn't lose it for Al Gore. Al Gore lost it for Al Gore." Quote, "Bush then started a war that Gore probably wouldn't have started." There's just no way any knowledgeable person can say this without being completely deluded. Clinton bombed Iraq for almost his entire term, and Gore supported it. And it was Gore who ran on the campaign of not being soft on countries like Iraq, while Bush ran on a humble foreign policy. There just isn't any reason whatsoever to think that Gore wouldn't have started the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, especially considering that both of these wars had overwhelming support from the Democrats when they began. And then he has the audacity to say, quote, "So my thought experiment is very much a real-world scenario, way more plausible than the average philosophical thought experiment." In what freaky parallel universe is that a real-world scenario? Where Gore is all of a sudden a peacenik and Romney would nuke half the world? Quote, "So here's what I'd ask of Friedersdorf. Either 1, say that you'd rather see half the human population die than cast an unprincipled vote for a drone-striking civil liberties disregarder." I don't think I need to make an actual response to this. Quote, Or 2, say that, actually, yes, the consequences of our choices are part of the moral calculus that should inform them. But of course, from the very beginning, he got the choice wrong. It just isn't the case that Johnson supporters would be people otherwise voting for Obama. All the data show fairly consistently that Johnson takes votes equally from Democrats, Republicans, and people who otherwise wouldn't vote. Further, while a vote for Johnson may not change the course of this election, voting Libertarian or any other third party is an effective way of protesting against the choices we're given. For if any third-party candidate individually or all of them collectively got enough votes, it would help tremendously to break through the barriers to fair elections set up by the Democrats and the Republicans. Greater vote totals means being taken more seriously by the media. It means being able to keep ballot access in many states. It means third parties being taken more seriously by the public at large. But what about Wright, the consequentialist and utilitarian? What he is advocating is absolutely the argument that we should vote for the lesser of two evils. But doing this only gets you more evil. The situation we're in right now is the result of voting for the lesser evil for decades. That doesn't sound like being a consequentialist to me, and it certainly doesn't sound utilitarian. Which is why, after all of these staggeringly bad arguments, only Robert Wright could possibly be this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! Well, that wraps up this hot button, big glutton, read button, cost cutting, Sarah Sutton, jaw jutting, mouth shutting, and I'm getting nuttin' edition of the Bogosity Podcast. Please visit the forums at Bogosity.tv where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free, but not free to produce, so please use the donate button at the top of the Bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@Bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Penn Jillette. Remember, the lesser of two evils is still evil, and the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Imported License. Bogosity. Do you want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not. Based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.